Welcome back to United Taste of America and our profile today on Wisconsin, the Badger State, or maybe even better yet, the Cheesehead State. I am your host, Rick K. Jones. If you've been watching or listening to us over the past few months, you now realize that America and American cuisine was completely built by immigrants from around the world who settled here. Again, nobody was here, not even the Native Americans. You know, everybody said, well, the Native Americans were there. No, they weren't. They walked across the Bering Sea several, centuries before anybody else. But everybody came to America from somewhere else. Everybody. And this blend of cultures is really, or the gumbo as I like to call it, is really what makes America so great. And Wisconsin was no exception. And today we are featuring a recent immigrant with her amazing Gouda cheese as our featured iconic dish. Wisconsin was Native American territory when the French trappers first explored the area, and they really did a good job of making friends with the Native Americans. I was reading something the other day about the American Revolutionary War in South Carolina, and the Cherokee Indians were trying to protect their land. And so they befriended the British. They fought on the British side in the Revolutionary War. And I found out something. They would trade deer pelts because deer pelts were so in demand in Europe. And same thing in Wisconsin. The French came in throughout the upper Midwest and did fur trading. And if somebody would say, well, why would you give somebody a beaver pelt for, some beads? Well, because there were a lot of beaver pelts and there weren't a lot of beads. And so, the French really did a great job because they weren't there to homestead. They weren't there to take their land. They were there. And in many cases, they weren't there to trap the furs themselves. They let the Native Americans do that, and they would just trade with them. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of still French names of towns throughout Wisconsin from the early times that they built trading posts and in some cases forts in Wisconsin. Wisconsin then became part of England in 1763 after the French and Indians War. But the first permanent settlers, again, were not Englishmen. They were French Canadians. They were French Canadians now living in a territory owned by Great Britain. Later, the Treaty of Paris gave Wisconsin to us, the United States, as a territory. And then in the 1820s, a funny thing happened. They ran out of copper in the Cornwall section of England, southern England, and a number of those miners migrated in the 1820s to Wisconsin to mine copper. And they had no place to live. And so they built homes, sleeping homes, where they burrowed out sides of hills. And so they would dig out a big area in a side of a hill, keep them away from predators, keep them away from extreme weather, and live in there. And somebody said, they live like badgers. And that's where the Badger State came from these miners from Cornwall that came there. And it stuck. Then in 1848, after so many immigrants came in, Wisconsin finally became our 30th state in the Union. And after that, then came thousands of largely European immigrants. Now, we've talked a lot about why immigrants came to the Midwest. It was the cheap land. Okay, so in many cases, they come for religious persecution or societal persecutions. There still was a caste system. If you weren't born to landed gentry, it was hard to get to that point. But if you came to America, you could be anything you wanted to be. But it was really cheap land. And it was cheap land largely owned by the railroads that wanted to have lots and lots of agricultural products to what? Put on trains. We got trains. We want the trains to be full of grains and other produce. And so that's how it happened. And so when you look at Wisconsin, again, Germans, Norwegians, Belgians, Dutch, Swedes, Finns, and Irish, lots. Later, African Americans, again, with the great, what we called Northern migration in the 1920s and 30s, came to Iowa, largely to work in some of the industrial plants that were there. And then in about 1930, you had a lot of Poles come. And again, what's going on in Europe in 1930? Hitler, the threat of the German Reich, and a lot of Poles got out of Dodge, and they came, of all places, to Iowa because Iowa reminded them a lot of the land that they had farmed on in Iowa. That tends to be a theme, y'all. People go where they recognize the land. We originally brought German scientists out to New Mexico when we were trying to build the atomic bomb, and they hated it. It didn't look like home. So they moved them where? To Huntsville, Alabama, because Huntsville, Alabama looked like Bavaria. And today, that's why Huntsville, Alabama is known for its space program and all the technology and all that stuff from the Germans that were resettled there during the Second World War. Again, so many of these people had come and bought land and homesteaded land and have the ability to grow lots of product. There was also some logging, a lot of logging that was going on in Wisconsin. But what was the number one agricultural product of Wisconsin? Dairy farming. And that led to, what we're going to talk about next, which is all of the great dairy products from Wisconsin. The immigrants to Wisconsin greatly influenced the culinary traditions for the Badger State. Wisconsin is famous for brewing beer. Lots and lots of Eastern Europeans, lots of German settlers that knew how to make great beer. And think about some of the great American beers. They're all German beers. Miller, Pabst, Schlitz. These were all beers that were created in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's known for butter burgers. These are hamburgers that the last thing you do is you put a gigantic pat of butter on it on the griddle, let that butter melt on the burger. You understand that because it's a dairy state that made really great butter, and you got to use the butter in some way. They have a product that I'd never heard of till I started doing some research. I've never had one, but it's called a cannibal sandwich. It's raw hamburger with onions on rye bread. So it's like a hamburger tartare with fresh onions on rye bread. And this version of steak tartare, they call it tiger meat. And it's very popular, especially during the Christmas holiday season. What did the Cornish miners bring with them? Cornish pasties. Those wonderful pasties that are a combination of beef, potatoes, gravy, all baked in kind of a shell, a pie shell that's completely covered, that they could take down in the mines and eat. And they're still very famous for their pasties in the western part of the state. Immigrants brought a lot of smoked meats, things like bratwurst, summer sausages. They make a thing called booyah soup. Booyah, a chicken and vegetable soup. Vegetables are like cabbage, carrots, and peas. It's more of a stew. It's called booyah soup. Wisconsin is famous for their Friday night fish fries, where they take lake fish, including pike and perch, and have these fish fries all over the state. Again, a lot of that was the Catholic influence, where they ate fish on Fridays. Then you've got amazing desserts in Wisconsin, things like the Danish kringle, you got frozen custards, you got the cream puff. The cream puffs are very famous at the Wisconsin State Fair, where they have all kinds of competitions for who has the best cream puff in the state and all kinds of flavors of cream puffs. But of course, this is what? This is the dairy state in America. And so they make cheeses of every kind. You can combine that great beer they make with great cheddar cheese and make your classic cheese soup. that is so famous and so good throughout Wisconsin. They're famous for what else? Cheese curds. The leftover remnants when you're making cheese, they're squeaky, they're just delicious. They're perfect as a snack in a bar with those classic beers. And they make all kinds of cheeses. But there was one cheese that they were missing, and it took a recent immigrant from Holland to remedy that. She found that with all of the great cheeses, no one in Wisconsin was making the classic cheese of her home country, the Gouda cheese. Her name is Marika Pinterman, and her journey started, she left Holland and came to Canada, and she worked in the dairy business, but she had started working on her family's farm back in the Netherlands. And so she grew up surrounded by cows and what we call the rich aroma of the dairy farm. And her love for dairy farming and great cheeses only deepened when she came from Canada to Wisconsin with her now business partner, Rolf. And they established a 350 cow dairy farm in a rural area in Wisconsin called Thorpe. So they got this big farm in Thorpe. She's making cheeses. They're selling raw milk. They're doing all kinds of things. But she misses the cheese of her youth, the cheese of her home country, the classic Gouda cheese. And she realized no one in America was making great Gouda cheese. So she began a quest, and she went back to Holland, went back and said, I want to learn everything about making Gouda cheese, and she became a licensed cheesemaker. And then she comes back with her degree in dairy business on the farm that they already had, and she starts making Gouda cheese. Y'all, it's a pretty amazing process. So she's founded her own company. It's called Marika Gouda. They make all kinds of different flavors of Gouda cheese, smoked Gouda, regular Gouda, all kinds of shapes and sizes. The warehouse, when you look at our vignette, you see all of the Gouda cheese wheels that are in there. It's pretty amazing. And she now makes what is considered some of the best Gouda cheese, not only in the United States, but in the world. She's won the Wisconsin Master Cheese Maker Awards and certification. She's only the fourth woman to ever have that. She's making just these amazing award-winning Goudas. 4 months after she made her first batch of Gouda in November 2006, she captured the gold medal at the U.S. Champion Cheese Contest. And dozens, if not hundreds of awards later, they're making these great dishes. She was selected in 2015 as the Wisconsin Outstanding Young Farmer Award winner. She's the first female to win this award. When you go there to the farm in Thorpe, they got an amazing setup that you can tour and see the entire process of how they make that. What does it start with? Grain. Okay? These are grain-fed cows, just grain. So they grow their own grains. Then they feed the cows that are there, and the cows that are there, and then they milk the cows, and they take from the milking station through underground pipes the raw milk that goes into the cheese factory. And there they go through the process of making the cheese. Like I said on our video vignette, you're going to really see the entire process that's a part of this. They also have a cafe there. They have a cheese shop there, so you can buy the cheese and you can sample cheeses and then buy cheeses from that standpoint and see it. And so this is a great case of a modern day immigrant, a young woman that has come to our country legally from the Netherlands and has built an amazing business. We spent the day at the farm, and I mean the whole day at the farm, seeing the entire process and sampling the product as it goes through the process. And it was a magical day, magical place, amazing foods. Marika Gouda, new immigrant in the state of Wisconsin. So where else should you eat in Wisconsin? God, where do you start? We're here, 3 from me. We talked about the great German settlers throughout Wisconsin, but so many of them settled around the Milwaukee area, and there's a great German restaurant called Mader's in Milwaukee. Classic German Bavarian foods. This restaurant was started in 1902. What are you going to have? Schnitzels, sauerbraten, potato pancakes, red cabbage. Wash it down with a local German-style beer. It's one of the great German restaurants in America, Mader's in Milwaukee. We talked about butter burgers. You know, those burgers that you put the pat of butter. There's a place in Glendale, Wisconsin, started in 1936 called Solly's. You take that wonderful, fresh-made Wisconsin butter and you put it on a burger. And then in Madison, Madison's the home of the University of Wisconsin, they have a place called the Old Fashioned. It's a great restaurant bar. Start with cheese curds and a beer, and then you're either going to have a bratwurst, or an old-fashioned fish fry after you've had your cheese curds and beer. 3 from me. Mader's in Milwaukee, Solly's in Glendale, and the Old Fashioned in Madison. Our playlist today is a really good one. We've got the song On Wisconsin, which is the theme song of the University of Wisconsin by William Purdy. We've got a great Jerry Lee Lewis song called What Made Milwaukee Famous. We've got the classic song they play at the end of the third quarter at the Badgers at their stadium called Jump Around by House of Pain. Steve Miller is from Wisconsin, the Steve Miller Band. We've got Fly Like an Eagle. And finally, one of my favorite artists of all time, the great Al Jarreau, is from Wisconsin, and we've got a classic song by him called Teach Me Tonight. So, okay, all you cheeseheads, that's the great state of Wisconsin, and another wonderful stop on United Taste of America. We'll see you right back here next week from state number 31. And it's a big one. It's California.